Dr. Jung, we have been discussing some of the factors in the development of the personality of the individual, and you have very kindly elaborated for us on some of your fundamental concepts, such as the archetype and the anima and the animus. Now, another concept or idea that seems to be a very interesting one in your work is the persona. I wonder if you would mind telling us a little bit about how you construe this term, persona.
Well, this is a practical concept we need in elucidating people's relation. I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. For instance, take the doctor. He has a certain way. For instance, he has good bedside manners, and he behaves as one expects a doctor behaves. He may even identify himself with it and believe that he is what he appears to be. He must appear in a certain form, unless people don't believe that he is a doctor. And so when he is a professor, he's also supposed to behave in a certain way so that it is plausible that he is a professor. So the persona is partially the result of the demands the society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or with what, or as one likes to appear. So take, for instance, a parson. He also has his particular manner, and as corresponding to the general expectation, and he behaves also in another way, combined with his persona that is forced upon him by society, in such a way that also is fiction of himself, his idea about himself, is more or less portrayed or represented. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself. Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure that that is all quite real and quite honest, yet it is not. Now, such a performance, or the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear. But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public. And people who don't know it, they stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that. They are it. And then you don't know, now, which is the real man? Is he the man as he is at home or in intimate relations? Or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde. Occasionally there is such a difference that you would almost be able to speak of double personality. And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic. They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, and in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, but they don't know it. They think they're all one. Everybody sees that they are two, and some know him only from one side, some others know him only from the other side, and then there are situations that clash, because if the way you are creates certain situations with people in your relations, and these two situations don't chime in, they are just dissonance. And the more that is the case, the more the people are neurotic.
Actually, would you say that the individual may even have more than two personas?
I mean, it can't afford it very well to play more than two roles. But there are cases, for instance, where people have up to 5 different personalities in cases of dissociation of personality, where, for instance, the one person, say, call it person A, doesn't know of the existence of the person B, but B knows of A. Or there may be a third personality, C, that doesn't know of the two others. There are such cases in literature, but they are rare. Very ordinary cases, it's just an ordinary dissociation of a personality. One calls that a systematic dissociation, in contradistinction to the chaotic or unsystematic dissociation you find in schizophrenia.
What is the difference between the term ego as you see it and the term...
Well, you see, the ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. For instance, in the case where B knows of A, but A doesn't know of B,
Yes.
In that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C.
Yes.
Because the ego has a more complete knowledge, and A is a split of personality.
You also use the term self. Would this have a different meaning than, say, ego or...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You see, when I say self, then you mustn't think of I, myself, because that is only your empirical self, and that is covered by the term ego.
Ego, yes.
But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of.
Yes.
What you know to be yourself. For instance, in our example, B that knows A, and A doesn't know B, B is relatively in the position of the self. Namely, the self is on the one side the ego, on the other side the unconscious personality, which is in the possession of everybody. Very often it's just the other way around, that the unconscious is in possession of consciousness. But that is a different case. Now, you see, while I am talking, I'm conscious of what I say, I'm conscious of myself, yet only to a certain extent. Quite a lot of things happen. For instance, I make gestures. I'm not conscious of them. They happen unconsciously. You can see them. I may say or use words, and I can't remember at all having used those words, or even at the moment I'm not conscious of them. So, any amount of unconscious things occur in my conscious condition. I'm never wholly conscious of myself. While I'm trying, for instance, to elaborate an argument, at the same time, there are unconscious processes that continue, perhaps a dream which I had last night, or a part of myself thinks of God knows what, or of a trip I'm going to take, or of such and such people I have seen, or when I am at writing a paper, I am continuing writing that paper in my mind without knowing it. You can discover these things, say, in dreams, or if you are clever in immediate observation of an individual, then you see in the gestures or in the expression in the face that there is what one calls an arrière-pensée, something behind conscious, so that you have finally the feeling, that man has something up his sleeve. And you can even ask him now, what are you really thinking? If you're thinking all the time something else, yet he's not conscious of it. Or he may be. There are, of course, great individual differences. There are individuals who have amazing knowledge of themselves, of the things that go on in themselves. But even those people wouldn't be capable of knowing what is going on in their unconscious. For instance, they are not conscious of the fact that while they live a conscious life, all the time a myth is played in the unconscious. A myth that extends over centuries. namely archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual, through the centuries. And that comes into the daylight in the great movements, say in political movements or in spiritual movements. For instance, in the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change. And that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted if somebody has been clever enough to see what there is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind, would be able to predict it. For instance, I have predicted the Nazi rising in Germany through the observation of my German patients.
Yes.
They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated, and with considerable detail. And I was already absolutely certain in the years before Hitler came, in the beginning of the, well, I could say the year 1919, I was sure that something was threatening in Germany, something very big and very catastrophic. And I only knew it through the observation of the unconscious. You see, there is something very particular in the different nations. This is a peculiar fact that the archetype of the anima plays a very great role in Western literature, French and Anglo-Saxon, not in Germany. There are exceedingly few examples in German literature where the anima plays a role.
Yes.
You know, that's it becomes from the fact that not one woman is buried unless she's buried as alt Kaminfegerskatte, at least. She must have a title, otherwise she hasn't existed.
Okay.
And so, you see, it is just as if, now mind you, this is a bit drastic, but it illustrates my point. In Germany, there are no women. There is Frau Doktor, Frau Professor, Frau Kommerzienrat, the grandmother, the mother-in-law, the grandfather, father, the son, the daughter, the sister, la femme. So next is the pot. Well, it is the idea, you see. Now that is an enormously important fact, which shows that in the German mind, there is going on a particular myth, something very particular. And psychologists really should look out for these things. But they prefer to think that I'm a prophet.
Ha! Now, so the first, a very interesting, remarkable set of statements here. How would you look at Hitler in this light? Would you see him as a personification, a symbol of the father?
Oh, well, no. Not at all. No, you see, I couldn't possibly explain that very complicated fact Hitler represents. It is too complicated, you know. He's a hero figure. And a hero figure is far more important than any fathers that have ever existed. Only was a hero in the German myth. Mind you, a religious hero. He was a savior. He was meant to be a savior. That is why they put his photo upon the altars, even. Or somebody declared this too, so that he is happy to that his eyes have beheld Hitler, and now he can die in peace. Oh, he's just a hero myth, you know.
Now, getting back to the idea of the self incorporates these unconscious.
The self is really a term that designates the whole personality, because the whole personality of man is indescribable. His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described, because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious. And it is really unconscious. It really does not know it. And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints, we have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. And that is the beauty of it, you know. It's very interesting. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Now, another set of ideas, which of course are very, very well known to the world, that of course you have originated, center around the terms introversion and extroversion.
Yeah.
And I know that you're aware of the fact that these terms have now become so widely known that the man on the street is using these terms constantly, describing his wife or his friends and so on and so forth. It's become probably the most used psychological concepts by the layman that we have.
Like the word complex. I have invented it too.
Yeah,
so there's a social experiment.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, you see, this is simply practical, because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now you see, the subjective factor, that's very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological or autoerotism. Now this is a mistake. The psyche has two important qualities. The one is the environmental influence,
Yes.
and the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes.
Yeah.
And they are there from the very first moment of our life. And they give a definite character, even to the little child. And that is a subjective factor, looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside, then it is just so as if you would observe the world. When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see whirling images, a world of images, generally known as fantasies. Yet these fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life. Or a bridge is built. These houses were all fantasies. Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And the fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact, nevertheless. It is, a form of energy. Despite the fact we can't measure it. It is a manifestation of something. And that is a reality that is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that. It is no more, you can't show it. But it has been a fact. And so the psychic events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect. So it is simply the world from within, seen from within. It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter. It is an idea that is not my invention, that the old Democritus already said, talked of the spiritus insertus atomis, namely the spirit that is inserted in atoms. That means psyche is a quality that appears in matter. Doesn't matter whether we understand it or not, but this is the conclusion we come to. If we draw conclusions without prejudice. And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influence of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, because this is valid, this is real. And the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing. Yeah. No, that man is just as well based, because he is based himself upon the world from within. And so he is quite right, even if he says, there is nothing but my fantasy, And of course, that is the introvert. And that the introvert is always afraid of the external world. He will tell you, when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it.
Yeah.
He will say, of course, yes, I know my fantasies. And he has always a resentment. And as the world in general, particularly America, is extroverted like hell, and the introvert has no place. Because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within.
Yeah.
And that gives him dignity, and that gives him certainty, because it is nowadays particularly the world hangs on a thin thread.
Yeah.
And that is the psyche of man. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their common sense for a bit. And the whole world is in environment and flames. Nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an age bomb. That is all man's doing.
Yeah.
We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? It is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of psyche is. Oh man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, he has just what he has in his head. It is all from his surrounding, his thought, such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed, well fed, then he has no idea of it. That's the great mistake. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.
Now, of course, one of the very common, I think, misconceptions of your work among some of the writers of America have been that they had sort of characterized your discussions of introversion and extroversion as suggesting that the world was made up of only two kinds of people, introverts on one hand and extroverts on the other. Would you like to comment about that?
Bismarck once said, God may protect me against my friends. With my enemies, I can deal myself alone. We know how people are. They catch a word, and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Such a man would be the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency, versus the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all. And you see, there are people who are very well balanced and are just as much influenced from within as they are from without, just as little. And so with all the finer classifications, they are only a sort of point de repère, points for orientation. My whole scheme of typology is merely a sort of orientation. Namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extroversion. the classification of individuals means nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium for the practical psychologists to explain, for instance, a husband to a wife or vice versa. For instance, it is very often the case, one could almost say, it is almost the rule, but I don't want to make too many rules in order not to be schematic, that an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the counter type to complement himself, for instance.
Dr. Jung, of course, tied in with your typology and quotation marks of introversion, extroversion. We first know of your concepts of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And, of course, we'd be very interested to hear some expansion of the meaning of these particular terms as related to the introvert-extrovert dichotomy.
Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, the sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, to be accepted or not, accepted or rejected. And intuition now there is a difficulty. You don't know ordinarily how intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got at that hunch or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had two patients, but the man was a sensation type and the woman was an intuitive type. Of course, they felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the Lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that die off the fish, you know. And then after a certain time they come up again and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bid who was the first to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out. Not at all. The woman won the bet completely. She was beating him on all points. Because by intuition she knew it before. Now, how is that possible? Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of association. Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious. That is as near as I can get. Now, this is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen. And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what is going to happen. For instance, you are standing in primeval forest. You only see for a few steps ahead. You go by the compass, perhaps, and you don't know what there is ahead. It is uncharted country. If you use your intuition, then you have hunches. And when you live under such primitive conditions, you instantly are aware of hunches. For instance, there are places that are favorable, there are places that are not favorable. You can't tell by your life what it is, but you better follow these hunches. Because anything can happen. Quite unforeseen things. For instance, at the end of a long day, you approach a river, and you don't know that there is a river. Yet, when you come to the river. That is quite unexpected. For miles there is no human habitation. You cannot swim across. It's all full of crocodiles. So what? You see? Now, such an obstacle hasn't been foreseen. But it may be that you have had a hunch, that you remained in the last likely spot, and that you wait for the following day that you can build a raft or something of the sort, or look out for possibilities. For instance, you also can have intuitions and that constantly happens in our jungle called a city. You can have a hunch, something is going wrong, particularly when you are driving an automobile. For instance, it is a day where nurses appear in the street, and they always try to get something interesting like a suicide, to be run over. That's what marvelous, apparently. And then, you get a peculiar feeling, and really, at the next corner already is a second nurse that runs in front of the automobile. Multiplicity of cases, that is a rule, that such chance happenings come in groups. And so you see, we have constantly warnings, hints that consist perhaps in a slight feeling of uneasiness or uncertainty, fear. Now, under primitive circumstances, you will pay attention to these things. They mean something. With us in our man-made, absolutely, apparently safe conditions, we don't need that function so very much. Yet we still use it. So you find that intuitive types, for instance, amongst bankers, Wall Street men, the day for lunches, gamblers of all descriptions. You find the type very frequently among doctors, because it helps them in their prognosis. Sometimes a case can look quite normal, as it were, and you don't foresee any complications. Yet, an inner voice tells you, now look out, here is something not quite all right, You cannot tell why and how, but we have a lot of subliminal perceptions, sense perceptions, and from those we probably draw a good deal of our intuitions, but that is perception by the way of the unconscious. And you can observe that with intuitive types. You see, intuitive types very often do not perceive by their eyes or by their ears. They perceive by intuition. For instance, once it happened that I had a woman patient in the morning at 9 o'clock. And you see, I often smoke my pipe, you saw the smell of tobacco in the room, or a cigar. And so she came and said, but you begin early. I said, couldn't you call it early at 9 o'clock? But no, you must have seen somebody at 8 o'clock. I said, how do you know? There had been a man there that had come at 8 o'clock already. Then she said, oh, well, I had just a hunch. There must have been a gentleman with you this morning. I said, how do you know it was a gentleman? He said, oh, well, I just had the impression, the atmosphere, it was just like a gentleman. All the time, the ashtray was under her nose, and there was a half-smoked cigar. But she wouldn't notice it. So you see, the intuitive is the type that doesn't see the stumbling block before his feet. But he's at for 10 miles.
You make a distinction between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert. For example, more specifically, what would be an example or a difference between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert?
Well, you have chosen a somewhat difficult case, because one of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert.
Yeah,
You know,
I am.
the intuitive extrovert, you find them all hunters, bankers.
Yeah.
That is quite understandable.
Yeah.
But the introvert is the introvert variety is more difficult because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world. And of course, that is now very difficult to understand because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them.
Yeah.
If he's not a fool, because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it. For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had seated her, he said, "You know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen." I said, "What?" "Yes, a snake. A black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen." And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. I said, "You know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake." Now, you see, our further conversation a little later, that was about in the middle of our treatment that only lasted for 10 consultations. She had foretold me, "I got 10 times, and then it's all right." I said, "How do you know?" "Oh, I got a hunch," she said. And really, about the 5th or 6th hour, she said, "Doctor, I must tell you, the snake has risen. It is now about here." Punch. And then, on the 10th day, I said, "Now, this is our last hour. And do you feel cured?" And she said, beaming, she said, "You know, this morning, it came up and came out of my mouth, and the head was golden." And those were her last words. Now, you see, that same girl, when it comes to reality, she came to me because she couldn't hear the step of her feet anymore, because she walked on air, literally. She couldn't hear it. That frightened her. And when she came to me, I asked her for her address. And then she said, "Oh, pension so-and-so. When it is not just called pension, but it is a sort of pension. I never had heard of it." Now, I'm curious, I never have heard of that place. "Well, it's a very nice place," she said. "You're curious enough, there are only young girls there, very nice, and very lively young girls, and they have a merry time. I often wish they would invite me to their merry evenings." And I said, "But, well, they amuse themselves all alone." "Oh no, there are plenty of young gentlemen coming in, and they have a beautiful time, but they never invite me." It turned out that it was a private portal. And she was perfectly decent girl, you know, of a very good family, not from here. She had found that place, I don't know how. And she was utterly unaware that those were all prostitutes. I said, "For heaven's sake, you fell into a very dark place. You hastened to get out of it." You see, that was her sensation.
Yeah.
See, she didn't see reality, but she had hunches like anything, and there came more. Now, you see, such a person cannot possibly speak of her experiences, because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I myself was quite shocked when I thought, for heaven's sake, is that case a schizophrenia? Yeah, because you don't hear that kind of speech. But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything, and he even doesn't understands such kind of language. So you see, if the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then backing over them with other side, you would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage. But it is an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience they encounter in that respect, but also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know, and suddenly they have inner images. And these inner images give them a more or less complete information about the psychology of the partner. You know, that is, but the case can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody who they don't know at all, not from Adam, and they know an important piece out of the biography of that person, and are not aware of it. So the introverted intuitive has, in a way, a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives.
Yeah.
But it is difficult often to get into their confidence, you know.
Yeah, because you say they're afraid that people will think they're sick.
The things that are interesting to them or are vital to them are utterly strange to the ordinary individual. But the psychologists should know of such things, you see. You see, when people make psychology as a psychologist what to do, well, the very first question is he extroverted or is he introvert?
Yeah.
If we look at entirely different things, is he a sensation type? Is he an intuitive type? Is he thinking? Is he feeling? Because you see, these things are complicated, that they are still more complicated because the introverted thinker, for instance, is compensated by extroverted feeling, or by inferior extroverted, archaic extroverted feeling. So an introverted thinker may be very crude in his feeling, like, for instance, the introverted philosopher that is always carefully avoiding women will be married by his cook in the end.
Now, then, in other words, then we can take your introverted, extrovert categories and, in a sense, go through describing a sensation, introvert type, sensation, extrovert type, thinking, introvert type, thinking, introvert type, and so on. In each case, and it stems from really not real category, but simply, as you say, an approach, something to sort of help us study, a model.
It is just a sort of a skeleton to which you have to add the flesh, or say it is a country mapped out, you know, by triangulation points, and that doesn't mean the country consists of triangulation points. That is only in order to have an idea of the distances, and so it is a means to an end. It only makes sense such a scheme when you deal with practical cases.
Of course, you're familiar with the work of Dr. J.B. Ryan at Duke University.
Yes.
And, of course, some of his work in extrasensory perception and clairvoyance, mental telepathy, you know, and so on and so forth. Some of the descriptions sound quite a bit like intuitive function operating. And in terms of your knowledge of this work, would you say that a person who has clairvoyance, in a sense, would then be an intuitive type?
That's quite probable. Or it can be a sensation type, say an extroverted sensation type that is very much influenced by the unconscious.
I see.
Because he has introverted intuition in his unconscious. You see, there are two groups, the rational group and the irrational group. The rational group is thinking and feeling, because the ideal thinking is a rational result, the rational values. That is differentiated feeling. Whereas sensation must needs be irrational, because it may not prejudice facts. You see, it shall not prejudice facts. The real ideal perception is that you have an accurate perception of the things as they are, without addition or correction. On the other side, the intuition does not look at the things as they are. That is prison, that is anathema to the intuition. It looks, ever so shortly at the things as they are, and makes off into an unconscious process, at the end of which we have seen something nobody else would have seen. Now, so you see these people who yield the best results are always those people where introverted or introverted intuition comes in. But you see, that is a side aspect of it. It's not interesting. There's another question, far more interesting, namely that the terms they use for Heine himself uses recognition, etc. They mean nothing at all. They're words, but he thinks he has said something when he says deliberately. That's nothing.
Now, of course, a lot of the things that you're describing, I think often scientists will say, well, this is due to chance occurrences, chance factors. And Ryan, in his own work, used statistical methods. We find this happening more often than would be affected by chance.
Well, you see, he proves that it is more than chance. It is statistically causable. And that is the important point. And that hasn't been contradicted.
Yeah.
You see, there was such a poor sap that happened in England. The man said, oh, Hein, well, that's nothing but guesswork. Exactly. Yeah, it is guessing. What you call guessing, a hunch is guessing. A definite guess, is a hunch, Just that. But that means nothing. You see, the point is that it is more than merely probable. It is not. It is beyond chance. And that is the great problem. But, people hate such problems. They can't deal with.
And so not concrete. They're not in front of them.
They can't deal with it. Even Ryan doesn't understand our argument in that respect. Because it is a relativation. Now I'm going to say something which in these sacred rooms is anathema. A relativation of time and space through psyche. That's the fact. And that is what Ryan has made evident. Now swallow that.
Well,
that's difficult.
Well, may I go a little further and for some of your recent work, which is indeed very profound, and it is not too well known to many of our students as yet.
Of course not. Nobody reads these things. Only the general public. Because my books are at least sold.
I'm referring now to the concept of synchronicity, which you have discussed, and which would have some relevance at this point in our discussion. Would you care to comment a little bit on this concept?
That is awfully complicated, and one wouldn't know where to begin. Of course, it is this kind of thinking has been started long ago, and when Ryan brought out these results, I thought now we have at least a more or less dependable basis to argue on, but the argument was not understood at all, because it's really very, very difficult. There are plenty of facts in the observation of the unconscious where you will come across cases of a very peculiar kind of parallel events, namely that, say, I have a certain thought or a certain definite subject is occupying my attention, my interest. At the same time, something else, quite independently, happens that portrays just that thought. Now, this is utter nonsense, looked at from a causal point of view. That it is not nonsense is made evident by the results of Weil's experiments. There is a probability, it is something more than chance, that such a case occurs. Now, I never made statistical experiments except one in the way of right for another purpose. But I have come across quite a number of cases where it was most astounding to find that two causal chains happened at the same time, but independent upon each other, so that you could say they have nothing to do with each other. Of course, it's quite clear. For instance, just so I speak of a red car, and at that moment a red car comes here. Now, I hadn't seen it. It was impossible because it was behind the building. In this moment, the red car appears. Now, this was a that's mere chance. The Weil's experiment proves that these cases are not mere chance. Of course, many of these things are occurrences where we cannot apply such an argument, otherwise we would be superstitious. We can't say, now this car has appeared because here was, some remarks have been made about the red car.
It's not cause and effect.
This is a miracle that a red car appears. It is not, it is chance, just chance. But these chances happening more often than chance allows. And that shows that there is something behind it. So we see, Ryan has a whole institute, and with many co-workers, and as the means, we have no means here, to make such experiments. Otherwise, I probably would have done them. But this just was physically impossible. So I had to content myself with the observation of facts.